A friend of mine says that when we're close to a close, we often think of the beginning. In my beginning, I don't know exactly how to put into words how terrified I was when I left the only state I had ever known to move all the way to the other side of the country, starting a new educational program in a new field at the graduate level and in an entirely new and so radically different place from where I grew up. You see, my anthropology degree, it did teach me about the concept of culture shock, but to experience it all alone while trying to focus on grad school was an entirely different beast to tackle. The loneliness quickly set in, and there were many nights spent crying to my partner as I poured out my heart on the phone and across 3,000 miles about the struggle of adjusting to all of this overwhelming change. But, slowly, I noticed that I had started to become comfortable in this new place. What was once terrifyingly new had begun to turn into the familiar. Eventually, I realized that I recognized other regular commuters on the train, knew the faces of the baristas who make the perfect cappuccino at the cafe down the street, and recognized the way that the seasons started to turn and when to anticipate the excitement of spring weather bringing the pale pink magnolia blossoms to Union Square. I even started to make friends, and friends that I now consider to be really important in my life. And through spending time with friends and nurturing an appreciation for my neighborhood, the blanket of loneliness started to lift from my shoulders, and I finally started to feel like I had found a place where I could belong. Belonging, though, isn't just the people and the place, although those things are very important. For me, what was equally as important is that I think I started to truly find myself, as cheesy and cliche as that might sound. See, when I left California, I was so terrified of myself, and especially my ADHD, thinking that I would fail if I didn't cling to some predetermined way of being productive, following a formula for being the perfect and successful student. Unfortunately, in the end, this led to a season of severe burnout and deep depression that I truly hope to never repeat. In response to that, though, I started to try and make more time for the things that were really important to me over this idea of productivity, of perfection, of being someone I'm not. This looked like giving my thesis as much time and space as it needed to formulate, delving deep into academic reading and thinking, learning how to teach others what I had learned, and dedicating space to rest and do nothing, and most importantly, developing that community that I credit with truly making me feel safe being myself. Now I am not the same person who entered into this program 2 years ago, and for the better. I find myself a much more confident person, and while I could go on and on about the ways in which I have changed, that's for another video. So for now, I turn it over to Past Katie, who, as commencement speaker, had a lot to say about this idea of community.
In fact, it seems only a moment ago since we met at orientation week. Some of us went to the museum at FIT. And then we remember your first classes. Key concepts in fashion studies, for example. When some of you were probably asking yourself, what's a key concept? What's fashion studies? What have I got myself into? But here you are now. And it went by very fast. And we're celebrating what you've achieved together and individually. So in my first fashion studies class of 2024, dream big. And many congratulations to you all. Over to Katie Ibsen as a graduate speaker. To congratulate Katie as our departmental honors student. So,
welcome to the commencement speech about fashion studies. But you're probably expecting me to get up here and start with a quote from a classic designer or an expensive fashion house. And I get it, we are at a fashion school after all, but as all of my fellow graduates know, that is not particularly me. I did not come to this program to study designers necessarily, but I came here to understand the deep and impactful meaning that we imbue into our clothing every single day. But before I get to the sweeping and broad life lessons to take away from the completion of a graduate degree, I want to start with a few thank yous. First and foremost to Hazel Clark and Heike Jens, without whom this program would not exist. And to the other faculty members, such as Francesca, Christina, Alexis, and Jonathan, among others. You have all helped me understand how the world makes sense through clothing clothing, and this program gave me the language to make that understanding real and tangible. Like many of us, I started trying to understand fashion long before I knew it was a field of study I could go into. For me, it was through cosplay, the hobby of making and wearing a costume based on a character from popular media, and I use air quotes because it's far more intense than to just call it a hobby. But I stopped making cosplays because I started attending community college full time and I didn't have the time nor the money, but I still wanted to know about it. So I sat myself down and started my first exploration into fashion research by looking at academic articles and trying to understand cosplay through scholarship. See, wearing a cosplay is often uncomfortable, grueling, with heavy costumes, high heels, and long days of photo shoots. So the question I wanted to answer was, why did I love it so much? After doing some research, I came to the conclusion that it was the embodiment of a character and a persona that made me feel empowered. I understood that we care about expressing ourselves through clothing so much that we are willing to put up with the physical discomfort for the emotional experience caused or otherwise. But after going through this program, I have another question. Why did we put ourselves through what was, at least for me, the emotionally grueling process of writing a thesis? The long hours of reading for literature reviews, the repetition of revision, and the sore feet from hiking books across the city. And just like the anthropologist that I fancy myself to be, I put myself through this process to try and answer the question. Just like wearing a cosplay, more broadly, much about fashion, writing a master's thesis requires a level of discomfort in order to make something about ourselves real. What makes this program so special to me is that it didn't just give me the language to understand why I love dressing up as different characters and why I'm okay with being sweaty at a convention center for hours, but it gave me a community to be with people who loved to analyze and reflect on fashion in the same way. While we all have different focuses, such as David and his research of family photographs that illustrated immigrant lives, or Presley, who explored memory and identity, the things our loved ones leave behind, or Daniel's work on the use of irony and gay identity formation through fashion, we are all united by our common interest in fashion research, and for many of us, understanding how it connects us to those we care about. I always knew people loved fashion. I didn't know people loved fashion the way that I loved fashion. I think everyone might love to gossip a little bit about who's wearing what at the Met Gala, for example, but we also love to dissect the socio-cultural aspects around it, like the Condé Nast strike that resolved mere hours before the gala, or the presence of anti-genocide protests that took place just outside its steps. See, nothing lives in isolation. Not global events, not fashion, and certainly not you or I. I really believe that we cannot understand the world we live in without this context, without having a community that not only supports us through something like writing what was for me an 84-page master's thesis, but it also helps us see the world through multiple lenses and makes us better for it. Over the last 2 years, what I believe is 17 of us, we're that community for each other. To do something as mentally and emotionally taxing as writing a thesis, we needed the time spent on Zoom calls with friends, or in the lounge with the graduate student writing group, or study sessions in the UC library. In short, time spent with community to make it through. Granted, we did spend a lot of that time yapping, as the kids like to say, but it kept us alive. And when I had the space to talk about this emotional experience and offload my worries and doubts and think through ideas and have my community as a soundboard, I could then go home and focus on my thesis when I truly needed to. So yes, please don't worry, Piker, my advisor. What I leave Parsons with is most definitely a better knowledge of the physical and digital spatialities of constructing vintage, the title of my thesis, but I also leave bearing a better understanding of the power of a community when it comes to accomplishing something I once thought unattainable and insurmountable. So as we leave here today, what we take with us is a sense of community that is centered around how fashion grants us a way to make sense of the world. And I don't mean to assume, but I think everybody here wears clothes. And we are all united by this one thing across time and space. I've spent many conversations, especially with my friend Cameron, talking about this because clothing, garments, textiles, it touches every part of our lives. It's not something that we can put down. And being gifted with this critical understanding of it is something significant beyond the confines of an academic program. However you choose to use this understanding, becoming the next editor of Vogue, or maybe teaching history through clothing to make it tangible, what we have learned to do is make fashion matter. Most importantly, united by this common experience, we understand fashion as a pathway to empathy. That even if what we wear looks different, we all wear and care about clothes. So as I wrap things up, let me close with one of the lines from my thesis acknowledgments. I just really want to drive home this idea of community. Community is a tapestry that keeps the threads of our lives woven together and helps to produce this work. Thank you. And then it was time to graduate, to celebrate, and to close this chapter of my life, but leaving the book open for whatever words may come in the next chapter. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.